Good morning. I will now call the June 4th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. The time is 11:01 a.m. and I would like to acknowledge that the City of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the traditional unceded territory of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Madam Clerk, can you please provide us with an overview of the meeting procedures?
Thank you. Good morning. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.12. Committee of the Whole is the initial venue for Council review of information to ensure that Council can debate and vote on issues at a future Council meeting. No voting takes place on bylaws or resolutions during Committee of the Whole. For voting purposes, Council has been provided with voting cards, green for in favor, red for opposed, yellow for point of order. For members of the public who would like to speak, an opportunity will be available later in the meeting during community forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated? Moved by Councillor Duick, seconded by Councillor Carreras. All those in favor? And that has passed unanimously. Next, we have the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 21st, 2024. To start, are there any amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, may I please have a motion to adopt the minutes as circulated? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Youssef. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. The minutes are adopted. Madam Clerk?
The first item on the agenda is under our delegations, and the first one is FortisBC supporting BC and First item on the agenda is under delegations. Our first delegation is from FortisBC supporting Clean BC and city's energy and climate goals, and representatives are here to present.
Thank you and welcome. And yes, just please go ahead whenever you are ready.
Oh no, I can talk very loudly.
There we go.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Amber Sadgrove, Community Relations Manager, and joining me is Mandy Assey, Senior Manager, Community and Indigenous Relations. I would like to acknowledge that we're speaking here today on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen and Katzie people. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you how FortisBC is supporting the advancement of Clean BC and the City of Maple Ridge's climate action goals. We recognize the amount of planning and investment required to support this growing and vibrant city, particularly in the midst of energy transition and an affordable housing crisis. We're all striving to meet climate goals and in a responsible and attainable manner. And really looking to support those provincial and municipal climate and energy goals. I have a short presentation that's just going to highlight BC's integrated energy system and the importance of affordability and resiliency as we continue to decarbonize the gas system. And then we'll have time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions and just talk about how we can support our role in just supporting the city's continued growth and energy climate goals. Okay. FortisBC is a regulated utility company. We provide natural gas and renewable gases to the province, but a lot of people don't know that FortisBC also provides electricity in the Okanagan, Kootenays, across Canada. We We actually own and operate 4 hydroelectric dams and operate about 7,000 kilometers of electric transmission and distribution power lines, in addition to more than 5,100 kilometers of transmission and distribution gas pipelines. We serve 135 communities across BC and 58 Indigenous communities across 150 traditional territories. In the city of Maple Ridge alone, we serve more than 2,500 residential and business customers. Our clean growth pathway to 2050. We have a significant role to play in the region and across the province. And because of that, we've developed a clean growth pathway to 2050 to guide our efforts in alignment with Clean BC. Energy efficiency is the quickest path to emission reduction while supporting affordability. We have a number of pathways for that, including energy efficiency, renewable gas and hydrogen, zero and low carbon transportation, and LNG for marine fueling. A key area, we've been developing programs for dual fuel hybrid heating systems, so customers can pair an electric heat pump with a high efficiency gas furnace. This ensures they have access to reliable, affordable energy on colder days when lowering the overall emissions is important. FortisBC is also testing new technologies like gas heat pumps in homes around the Lower Mainland and Kelowna, and we are developing future rebate programs and piloting new technologies, kind of taking that holistic approach to energy efficiency upgrades that aim to decrease energy uses in homes by less than half. Hydrogen we see as the next generation of renewable gas, and we're exploring that to meet BC Clean BC targets. We're currently partnering with UBC Okanagan to determine the feasibility of hydrogen in our system and anticipating developing hydrogen hubs, which I'm sure you've all heard of in the news, throughout the province to connect a dedicated hydrogen supply for industry and transportation.
So I'm actually going to ask us to zoom out a little bit as we talk about, energy and the use of energy in BC. And this particular bar graph, is a good representation because it shows really all the diverse energy sources that support BC's needs today. As you can see, the lion's share of the energy actually is accounted for by refined petroleum products such as diesel, gasoline, oil, followed by natural gas next, which is, about 30% of the energy mix. And then closely followed by electricity provided by BC Hydro, as well as FortisBC, which is about 16 to 20%. And then followed by biofuels, which is like biodiesels, biogas, et cetera. So, what this particular graph really shows us is the diversity and, the requirement of all these different energy sources that to support BC's energy needs today. And so as we think about, our shift towards decarbonization, we do see that both natural gas and electricity today do support the province's lion's share of energy needs. I'll go to the next slide now. And so this particular graph is, I'll share with you some of the key highlights about this graph. This is the energy demand per day over the last 5 years. So there's a lot of information, but I'll point out, the more salient parts of this graph. The green spikes that you see is natural gas, and the blue is electricity. Now, by looking at the green, you'll see that there's quite a bit of flex and peaking of the gas system. And this is the benefit of the gas system, because it's got actually the ability to provide energy on peak days. It's actually able to manage the seasonality with our weathers. Where it's very cold, you can see it peaks really high, and then it goes down when it's, a moderate weather. You can see the electric system doesn't have as much flex built in, and that's the nature of the electric system, because we never overinvest in infrastructure that will really cost our customers, a lot more investment that's needed by the utilities. So the gas and the electric system together have a really good synergy to really meet those really cold days. And this is where, as Amber said, the hybrid or the dual heating systems really come into play, because when it's really, really cold, your gas furnace over a certain temperature will come into play. And when it's not cold, it's really predominantly your electric heat pump that's working. And we've talked a lot about peak days. And so this is, an example of January 12th this year, where we had one of the coldest days, in the province. And what this shows, this, particular pie chart shows that the gas system produced, or actually supported, about 21,000 megawatts of energy. And the electric system reached its new peak as well at over 11,000 megawatts. And together, both systems working together allowed us to provide that resilient heat to all British Columbians, businesses, industry, providing that energy security that is so important during a time where, we want to make sure economic development and prosperity, all those things that allow municipalities to advance their goals can be fulfilled. I'm going to actually pass it on now to Amber.
Thanks, Mandy. That's a really good overview of how the systems really pair well together to support the province's energy needs. I'm just going to move on to the next slide, our route to decarbonization. We really do believe that embracing this diverse energy options will ensure a sustainable and prosperous future for Maple Ridge. We're very committed to supporting Maple Ridge's growth and development. I love coming here and seeing familiar faces and having discussions with you about how we can support, and just wanted to outline the importance of considering that multiple pathways of energy sources, not just to bolster economic development, but also to meet those crucial objectives such as housing affordability, energy resilience, reliability, and providing choices for residents. We've highlighted here briefly some important solutions for Maple Ridge that they could incorporate, such as dual fuel, hybrid heating and cooling systems, significant investments in energy efficiency upgrades and retrofits, and continued expansion of renewable gases, including RNG and hydrogen. We do hope this presentation has provided you with some insight and confidence in our dedication to working with the City of Maple Ridge to achieve these goals. And we'd love to hear any questions and thoughts that you have, so that we can continue this conversation and support you.
Great, thank you very much. Lots of good information there. Council, do we have any questions or comments for Fortis this morning? Mayor Ramey.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Certainly, we've had many conversations in the past. I am curious because you talk about the hybrid heating. We talked about that a while ago. Where does that fit into the province's STEP code? Have they recognized hybrid heating, or because, as you know, the STEP code by 2030 needs to have ABC in place. So has this been discussed with the province? Have they acknowledged this technology?
Yeah. Do you want to take that one, Manny?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, so Mayor, definitely the conversations are very actively in place with the province. And in fact, there is support for that. Recently, the BCUC also approved our DSM application for $700 million. And predominantly that application is to support hybrid heating system solutions in the province. And, when it comes to really supporting new construction and zero carbon STEP code, those conversations are very much underway as we speak today as well. We do realize that, or appreciate that, for new construction, also our community needs both solutions, gas as well as electricity. And so that is where, we have a vision that, the hybrid heating system would be using renewable natural gas. So you've got the ability to leverage both clean electricity and renewable natural gas to meet that zero carbon STEP code requirement.
Thank you. Can I ask another question?
Certainly.
Through the chair, can you tell us RNG. I mean, we hear this term all the time, renewable natural gas. And depending on who you're talking to, you either go thumbs up or you go thumbs down. A lot of things that I keep hearing is there's just not enough renewable natural gas to make a difference. Can you speak to that?
Do you want me to?
If you please.
All right. That's a great question and definitely one that we hear often. The short answer is there is enough. We have almost 20 contracts underway right now. And with that, with all those coming on board in the next couple of years, that'll be about the same energy as Site C provides. So the capacity for RNG to play a role is definitely there, and we see that as a solution. It does take folks coming on board, but definitely we have those projects underway and signing more, in the years to come as well. So as far as the capacity for RNG, it's definitely there. It's like any energy source, like hydrogen or other things. It does not move maybe as quickly as we would all like, but we're seeing those numbers and the percentages that we're kind of integrating into our system rise as the years go by. So we're definitely on target. I believe for our 2030 goal to even exceed our expectation. So we're really proud of that and only see that as growing as the years go on.
Thank you. One more?
Yes.
Okay, so staying with renewable natural gas. Again, one of the things that I hear all the time, and this is part of the challenge that's out there. There's so much misinformation, disinformation that's out there, and we're just trying to get to the heart of that. So when we're talking about renewable natural gas, one of the arguments I hear is, yeah, but it's still fossil fuels, so why are we going down this road? Which there is some truth to that. So where is this renewable gas coming from? How are you producing this renewable gas?
Right. So there is multiple sources of RNG. We have a number of projects in the Lower Mainland on Lugo Island, with the City of Vancouver, with Dicklands Farms. So there's few different sources. One of the large ones we're looking at right now is landfills. So there is a lot of carbon capture to happen there. Those kind of, like you said, fossil fuels, it's something that's already emitting into the environment. And so we see that as an opportunity to capture that, use that as an energy source. So then, number one, we're using a renewable energy source, but then you're also taking away some of that greenhouse gas that was previously emitting into the air. So there's a landfill component, sewer component, so wastewater. Also, as I mentioned, Dickland Farms. So that's pairing with dairy farms, working with them. They're doing some really amazing work in that field where, dairy farms do emit quite a lot of greenhouse gases. And so being able to capture that and harness that energy and kind of repurpose it back into our system, it is, to me, makes a lot of sense. It's honestly one of the reasons I joined Fortis is I see their commitment to unique solutions for energy sources. And as I mentioned, those greenhouse gases are kind of emitting into our air as we bury them in landfills or put them through wastewater treatments or refarm with them, but harnessing them kind of makes sense, I think, as we go forward and look at more holistic ways to capture energy. So those are some of the ways. There's also wood waste. Manny, am I missing any?
Yeah, no, I was gonna just
Yeah, go ahead.
compliment what you were saying by, as Amber said, once we actually can capture the methane that's usually being escaped from landfills, et cetera, the carbon intensity of renewable natural gas is much, much lower. It actually can be in the negative as well. And negative because you're actually displacing carbon that would have usually been emitted or transported in the pipelines. And now you're using this, renewable product or biogas that's been produced. So I'm not a technical person, but the engineers in my team tell me that the carbon intensity of renewable gas is, for example, 0.29 CO2 per kilogram, and which is actually even lower than BC Hydro's electricity at times, because it's displacing the carbon molecule that would have been emitted into the atmosphere. And then you've got hydrogen, right? If it's green hydrogen, obviously is produced from electricity, that would be inserted into our pipelines, but also turquoise hydrogen, which is when you actually capture the carbon into a solid form. So there's a lot of different technologies that we're looking at, and I think working with municipalities and industries is the way for us to actually ramp up supply. I think the challenge for us is the more demand there is, the more we're able to produce. So I think that's why the collaboration with industry, municipalities, government is so key to just the holistic success.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Mayor Remy. Any other questions? I'm going to go to Councillor Tan, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Duick. Councillor Tan, go ahead, please.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks to Madam Clark for that invitation to unmute. And thank you so much to Fortis for coming here today. It's really helpful for us to just understand more as we go through the decision-making process, to hear from everyone. I think from our end, I'm trying to understand how affordability and climate change action can sort of take place in hand together. Can you sort of walk us through the increase or decrease, or has household rates stayed the same for gas over the last 5-10 years? Just trying to understand how utility and power rates are changing.
Sorry, I missed the question. Affordability.
Sorry, can I just clarify? The question is on affordability and how gas plays a role into that?
Yeah, and so overall, I'm trying to understand affordability. And then so my specific question is around the average household bill. Can you talk to me about how the average household bill for residents in Maple Ridge, has it increased, has it decreased, has it stayed the same over the last 5-10 years?
Sure. Yes, I can certainly attempt to answer that. So in terms of, in the city of Maple Ridge today, we have approximately 28,000 natural gas customers. And I would say over the past 5 years, just with the way the market prices are, because the way FortisBC procures its gas, it's based on what's available in the market. And of course, then we've got some balancing mechanisms. And the rate, I would say, for the last 5 years has been actually significantly lower than when it was in 2012 or 2010. For instance, today, right now, customers for the commodity I'm just talking about conventional natural gas right now, are paying just under $3. And once you add in all delivery charges and storage, it's about $9. So that's about 3.3 cents a kilowatt hours, which is, I would probably defer to my electric colleagues to speak to how that compares with the electric rate, but it is actually quite affordable. And even if customers today were to opt in and buy renewable natural gas, even then actually it's quite affordable, because you can buy different blends, and it's about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, I mean, the truth of the matter is that as we all work towards injecting more renewables over time, they are increased costs, no matter with which technology you use. But as technology improves, we've seen that we're able to actually procure energy, even like renewable natural gas, at much more, affordable prices. So, affordability is a big concern, I think, for municipalities. It's a big thing for FortisBC. Like Amber said, we serve, over 1.2 million customers. We want to continue offer them affordability, offer them choice, and of course, offer them energy security. So, I hope that answers your question in terms of where we are today. And if I can just add one more point here is we recently received approval from the BCUC to start injecting renewable natural gas into our system. So as effective July 1st, we'll actually integrate about 1%, which is about 250,000 gigajoules of renewable natural gas in the system, which would help decarbonize really all customers using gas to a degree. And there's no rate increase planned for that. So, we try to use the different tools that we have available to keep, rates balanced.
That's helpful, thank you. And through Madam Chair again, the reason why I asked that question was affordability is quite on our minds. And I was just doing a little bit of internet Googling, and I think I'm seeing that there's like quite a substantial increase in the cost for the average household when it comes to gas between 5 years ago and then now I think I'm on the BCUC website. And I know you were talking about market conditions shifting. Can you sort of give us a bit of a sense of what was causing that increase in the average household bill?
I would say, yeah. So, market conditions obviously have a big, role to play. I'll take us back to, I think, in 2018, when there was the rupture in the Enbridge pipeline, and there was a shortfall of capacity, the rates in the market went very, very high to procure gas in the market. That, of course, didn't affect FortisBC because we have long-term contracted rates. So we actually have a whole gas supply department that will go out in the market and secure and procure gas for the long term, so that the market ebbs and flows remain balanced for our customers, so that they're not feeling the pinch of the very, very high or the very, very low. We try to keep the consistency, and that's been a great way for us to ensure that people have predictability in their household bills.
Thank you for that. And through Madam Chair, I think my last question, also around the affordability piece. I'm curious about, you talked a little bit about RNG, and my understanding is that folks are generally on conventional natural gas and on RNG. Can you talk to me about if the average household wanted to increase their blend of RNG to 100% of what is being used to power their home? Can you talk to me about what that would look like in terms of the average household bill?
Yes. So when we look at what the impact is, the household would actually have a choice, right? So today, the way the tariff is that, a household can choose to buy anywhere from 5% up to 100%. So that alone, that in itself gives them the flexibility. Now, with the 100% at the commodity level, if for gas today, let's say, is 3 cents a kilowatt hour, renewable natural gas would be about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So I would say that on the commodity piece, it's, by renewable natural gas, it would be almost double.
Right. Okay.
Right. And still quite affordable than their, some of the other energy sources that they might be using.
Right. I understand. So there is a price premium, and households have to sort of balance the amount of climate action that they're sort of able to take on and what they're able to afford. I think is okay. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I have more, but Madam Chair, I think I'll hold off on the rest for now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Tan. Next, we'll go to Councillor Duick, and then we'll come to Councillor Youssef.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Is it possible to get a copy of your presentation? I did take some notes, but you had some good information in there. And just confirm the number of businesses and homes that you serve, because I think I heard 2 different numbers, so I want to just make sure I have it right.
In the city itself?
Yes.
About 26,000 customers.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I think for me, the presentation is helpful because one thing I'm hearing is affordability. So to do the right thing and follow the step code and proceed, we also have to appreciate that people have affordability is front and center, whether it's our utilities or it's our taxes or our groceries, just the basics that we need to survive. So I think the piece that I really appreciate is the dual fuel options for a number of reasons. If we stick just with commercial, we heard from a lot of commercial businesses that, please continue with natural gas until technology, maybe there's some options in the future. And I know that at the last discussion we had, we that wasn't the intent with our move forward. So I think it's important we keep an open mind on that, especially in maybe not as much in Maple Ridge, but in other areas of the province when it gets extremely cold. The technology doesn't keep up with heat pumps and that. So I think we need to keep an open mind and really think about people's affordability at the same time, appreciating that we need to ensure that moving forward, we protect the environment and all of that. So I do appreciate your presentation. I think it's important because, as the mayor said, we hear anecdotes of different pieces. And so it's nice to hear it right from the people that work for the organization. So appreciate your time.
Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to start off by thanking FortisBC for coming out today and giving us this information. It's really great to learn of the outstanding efforts that Fortis is undertaking to provide affordable and sustainable energy, as well as, of course, their carbon capture and decarbonization efforts that are leading the charge as well towards hydrogen. I recently had an opportunity through the Liquid Waste Committee with Metro Vancouver to visit and tour the Lulu Island wastewater treatment plant and to see firsthand how renewable natural gas can become a rather affordable source of energy for households. And while I'm on that topic, I'd like to plug in Fortis ear, if I may, plant a little bug for making it even more affordable for households, as they would be contributors to the supply in this case. So moving forward, I believe energy is going to become more affordable as we have a ready supply coming from our households through the wastewater treatment plants and the energy that we're able to capture from that, as well as, of course, as was mentioned, some of the dairy farms and other human activities that we generally carry out that would otherwise be producing carbon. In this case, I like the philosophy of utilizing those activities to capture the carbon and turn it into energy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's we've had a couple of weeks of a lot of interesting discussions, and I've been delving into this. I wasn't on the mayor's task force, so a lot of this is new information to me, and so I'm really appreciative to have both you and BC Hydro here today. I have a quick question because there's, again, lots of things different, coming at us, and I know Councillor Tan talked about the last 5 years and the increases to gas. What does it look like going forward? What sort of cost pressures are you seeing, and what sort of increases do you think is going to happen within the industry?
I would say that, as we look at our long-term, resource plan and, our rate pressures, I would say that the investment that we've made in, our 50,000 kilometers of pipeline allows us to leverage the system so that, one, we are not making additional capital investments, so that alone allows us to keep our rates balanced. And again, it is, working with our market tools. The gas supply market is actually, there's a lot of abundance of natural gas in BC. So, but as we start to wean off natural gas and we transition to renewable natural gas, obviously there is going to be an incremental increase in rates. However, it is a transition, right? So by 2030, we anticipate 15% of our throughput to be renewable. And in terms of, what that cost looks like, we're modeling that right now. And I think once we have that, we're happy to share that with the city. Mm-hmm. I think from a priority perspective, it is definitely a balance between reaching municipal and provincial targets. Like, we're looking at a net zero future with the gas system. And so what that means is, we will procure more renewable natural gas, we will invest in more hydrogen, and all of that will, of course, have impacts on the end rate for customers. And I think that's why, natural gas has been so appealing to a lot of our customers, because it has been so affordable. But, the priority is to decarbonize, and priority is to meet those climate action goals. So we're doing it in a much more balanced way, so that there is, we have the imperative not to have rate shocks. We're going to use all the mechanisms to keep, rates balanced. And in terms of, I can't give you a model today of what the next 15, 20 years looks like, but it's certainly information that Amber and I can take back and see if we can provide a bit of a look into the future.
No, that's great, because I know we talk about what it looks like right now for natural gas and electricity heating, but what does it look like in the future as there's more pressure and I think more taxes and things being added to that type of gases? I'm wondering if it does a little bit of this as we go forward. So that's sort of where my question is coming from. And then the other question I have, and I know you've talked a lot about this over your presentation, which is really helpful, and I'm wondering if you can just sort of give a quick synopsis of it. I'm sure you paid attention to our discussion last week around moving to a zero-step code, and do we do it earlier than the province? At the end of the day, it looks like the province is going to move that way, and really our discussion is, do we go earlier or later? So when we look to it ultimately happening, how are you as an organization shifting and preparing for that change? And what is your sustainability look like going forward after that?
Right. So, we are very much invested, as I said, and Amber and I said, in supporting decarbonization for new and existing buildings. And for new buildings, as you mentioned, zero carbon step code has been introduced by the province as a mechanism to ensure that new buildings are connected to, the lowest source of carbon emission energy. This is where, renewable natural gas actually can meet that particular threshold really well. So we did have an application in front of the commission where, we had proposed that 100% of new construction projects can actually use renewable natural gas. And, that application actually, we got approvals to blend, but for new construction, that particular element needs a bit more reworking. So we're actually taking it back and going to look at what's the best way for us to support the new construction and the zero carbon step code. And our plan is to actually engage with municipalities, engage with industry, and see, what does that look like in terms of rate structure? What does that look like in terms of providing, builders, developers, affordable housing, that choice, so that there's multiple pathways to reach zero carbon step code? Because just by having one pathway, let's say if it's all electricity, you do put a lot of strain on the electric system. You've got, of course, other needs for the electric system. So, we believe that, again, to have that truly integrated energy system, let's make sure there's another pathway. And so we're committed to, working with the municipalities and province to see, develop that a new tariff and new system that can support the zero carbon step code. Long answer, I think.
Sorry, can I add one little thing to that? I mean, as we're having those zero carbon step codes and talking about province timelines, I think what Mandy said really rings true. We're working with the BCUC. We're trying to meet those targets, and I think we are on the right path for those 2030 targets. But as municipalities are kind of looking to maybe make those changes sooner than 2030, that's where we're trying to have those discussions, because we do realize this policy takes time, and so we are aware that the 2030 timeline is there, but also knowing that municipalities, some are looking to move sooner than that, and so as we're having discussions with BCUC, that's something that we are aware of, and see that capacity and making sure that we can hopefully meet the needs of the community and their unique needs, but recognizing that some folks feel like 2030 maybe isn't soon enough. But we're working as fast as we can, and I think really aligned with the province and their timeline.
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Okay, great discussion. Thank you for sharing the information. I think just in the interest of time, unless there's any burning questions, perhaps we'll just move on to the next presentation. I really appreciate you guys being here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Our next presentation is from BC Hydro, and they also have a presentation.
Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Mayor Rumi and Council, for inviting BC Hydro for this presentation. My name is Ajay Kumar. I'm the Vice President of Planning in BC Hydro, and I'm joined by my colleague, Emily Shepherd, who is in our Community Relations team. And we've been actually doing this roadshow with different municipalities over the last couple of months, and really appreciate the opportunity for us to come here and talk about BC Hydro and how we fit into the energy future for the province. As we all know, and I think Ford has talked about this, there is a changing landscape that we are facing in the province, and the changing landscape is driven by a number of different factors. One of them is policy, and we sort of alluded to that as part of the last discussion. Some of that is happening because the customer expectations are changing in terms of EVs and heat pumps and what their expectations are. At the same time, there's a growing population that we are seeing in BC as well as across Canada. And lastly, I would say is that this climate change is impacting our day-to-day lives, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks in the news and even the years before, where we have had challenges in BC in terms of how climate change is impacting our landscape. So in all the sort of environment, what we are starting to see is there's an energy transition that's happening. And I think Ford has talked about the fact that there's 20% of the energy needs in BC come from electricity, and the rest comes from fossil and biofuels. And from our perspective, if you start looking at the goals of the province with terms of the 40% reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, we see that 20% from electricity changing. Now, the question is going to be, what is that change that we see in the next few years, and what's that number where we are going to land? So I think from that perspective, if you start looking at the future, our focus is on flexible planning. And here what we are showing is the overall energy that BC Hydro has supplied over the years. And you can see there's a lot of flatness in that amount of energy. And that is actually reflective of a lot of the utilities, not only in North America, but across the world, where in the last 10 years, the load has been relatively flat. But the challenge that we are facing as a utility, as we look in the future, and with this energy transition that we've talked about ad nauseum, we are looking at a wide spectrum of that energy in the future. And that is what we are showing over here, is that on the high side, the energy needs in the province could increase quite significantly from an electricity standpoint. And that is what our plan is actually approaching, is giving us that flexibility for us to actually meet those future requirements as we move forward. And as part of the load, we also have to look at the generation side, because load is only one part of the equation. And from a generation standpoint, as we've talked about before in the media, we have the Site C generation plant, which is about 1,100 megawatts. It's going to give us about 8% of our energy needs in the future. And the reservoir filling for this Site C dam is going to start late summer into early fall this year. And we expect the first unit to be operational by end of this year. And the other 5 units will be operational by the end of next year. So we should have at our disposal another 1,100 megawatts of generation from the Site C dam that is currently underway. In addition to Site C, you may have seen in the news, we are also looking for call for power from independent power producers. This was announced by the government and BC Hydro last year. We are in the midst of that call right now. We've received a number of submissions from IPPs, and our teams are right now evaluating those proposals from the IPP communities. And we expect to actually have energy purchase agreements with those IPPs by the end of the year. And we do expect another 3,000 gigawatt hours of energy to be produced through this call. And the good thing is this is one of a series of calls that we have planned. And after this call, we do expect that every 2 years we would have a call for procuring enough energy for us to meet that transition that I talked about before. And this is actually our first big call in the last 15 years. So from a BC Hydro standpoint, this is actually quite an important thing that we are undertaking, and we are quite excited about the proposals that we are evaluating right now. In addition to the call, we also have to look after our infrastructure. And you might have seen in the news, we've actually got a capital plan that we put together last year that actually totals about $36 billion. And that is a 50% increase from our capital plan we had the year before. And there are three main components of our capital plan. One is the sustainment. As you know, we have a lot of infrastructure on the generation, transmission, distribution side, which is quite old and was put in place in the 60s and the 70s. So we spend a lot of our capital expenditures towards sustaining that existing infrastructure. And that's about $21 billion of our $36 billion plan goes towards the sustainment. We also have about $10 billion that we have earmarked for electrification and growth on the system. That's going to give us that capacity that we need for us to actually serve that increased load. And we also have about $5 billion earmarked for connecting our customers, because there's a lot of residential, commercial, and industrial customers that are connecting to our system. And that is the third component of our capital plan as we go forward. One thing I would like to say is that we developed this 10-year capital plan on an annual basis. And we are in the midst of looking at our next cycle, which is underway right now, which is going to give us an indication of what the next 10 years look like. So this is an ever-evolving document for us that gives us an indication of where we want to be from a capital standpoint, taking the latest inputs from the environment that we have to consider as we move forward. As far as our growth potentials are concerned in the Lower Mainland, this actually graphic shows, based on our last capital plan, where we saw a significant amount of growth happening in the Lower Mainland and where we need to increase our capacity. So that's sort of an indication of some of the hot areas that we are looking at. And our capital plan currently aligns with providing us with the reinforcements that are required for this. As I mentioned, we look at our capital plan every year. And as we are going through the cycle, as we get more information based on where the load growth has happened, we are going to be looking at expanding our capital plan in other areas as we start seeing the needs for that capacity. With respect to Maple Ridge, I just want to spend a few minutes and talk about the infrastructure that feeds your customers. There are actually two substations that are providing the electricity for Maple Ridge. One is called the Maple Ridge substation, which is shown by that red dot on the left-hand side across the Dudney Trunk Road. And in the middle, you'll see there's another red dot, which is our Haney substation. So those are the two substations that provide the capacity for serving our customers in Maple Ridge. And we do have projects in our capital plan that will allow us not only to address the capacity requirements, but also to ensure some of the sustained requirements that we see, especially in the Maple Ridge substation, where one of the feeder sections is reaching end of life. And we currently have a capital plan project underway. It's about in the range of $50 to $100 million, where we are replacing that feeder section with an indoor GIS control building. And that is going to be in operation by about fiscal 28. And then we also have a feeder that we are going to be taking out of our Haney substation to serve some loads that we are seeing in Albion Flats and Cottonwood. So overall, our capital plan is aligned with what the growth requirements in Maple Ridge are, and we constantly monitor those requirements and make sure that the capital plan aligns with what the requirements would be going forward. On the transmission side, we do have 3 60 kV lines that go through Maple Ridge, and the conductors on those lines are reaching end of life. And we have a project in our capital plan that will be initiated in F28 that will allow us to replace those conductors. And as part of that replacement of the conductors, we're also looking at relocating portion of that line to a different route so that we can actually free up that space on Dudney Trunk Road. In addition, we are also talking to a customer right now that's going to connect to our transmission system. It's a load customer, and we are currently underway with our studies to ensure that we can serve the load that the customer is requesting. Overall, the message here from BC Hydro is that we are here to support our customers, and we've seen a huge change in terms of the expectations from our customer base. And our capital plan is aligned for us to meet those requirements as we go forward. And there's flexibility built into our planning as we do, and we try to understand what that means for the province and for the various municipalities. With respect to Maple Ridge, I would say our expectation with most of the municipalities is that we want to endure and go forward with a joint planning exercise where we share our plans and we understand the plans from the community so that we can actually start doing planning for our infrastructure together so that we can meet the requirements of the changing landscape as I talked about. So with that, maybe I'll open it up for any questions that you may have for our plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, do we have any questions or comments for BC Hydro? Councillor Youssef, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to BC Hydro for the presentation. Really appreciate the information they provided today. Just a couple of quick questions. With the upcoming demand for summertime and hearing reports of low reservoir levels, how is BC Hydro intending to meet the rise in demand over the summer?
So with respect to the reservoir levels, I'm sure you have read in the news about the low reservoir levels last year. Actually, for this year, BC Hydro's reservoir levels are higher than it was the year before, and it's at an average level that we expected. And I think from that perspective, a couple of things that I want to mention. One is we do have interties with Alberta and with the US electric grids, which allows us that flexibility to have the imports that we require during those times where the reservoir levels would be low. At the same time, as you know, we are also looking at expanding our generation base. With Site C coming along, that gives us about 8% of additional energy on our system that is going to be coming online by end of next year. We are also going through the call, as I mentioned, that's going to give us another 3,000 gigawatt hours of energy that will complement the existing resources that we have. So I think between the fact that we have interconnectivity with other grids, we have new generation coming online, and we also have reservoirs that are at a better level than they were last year, gives us that flexibility for us to require that load or serve that load as the energy demands increase.
Thank you for that, and I'm glad to hear that the reservoir levels are higher than previously were reported, as reading about how much electricity and how much money was spent to purchase electricity by BC Hydro last year to meet the demand was a bit of an eye-opener. My second question through you, Madam Chair, to BC Hydro is, when can we expect to see a fish passage on the Alouette River?
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Emily Shepard here with the Community Relations team. So
Emily, can I just get you to step right up to the
absolutely.
microphone, please? Thank
Apologies.
you.
Emily Shepard here with the Community Relations team. Thanks for that question, Councillor Youssef. I know this is a really important question for the City of Maple Ridge and many others in the community here, and just want to reassure you that the City of Maple Ridge recently joined our Alouette River Salmon Restoration Program, which is a program that we have in place with the intention to look at feasible fish passage opportunities in the future. So we're really pleased that the City of Maple Ridge recently joined that table, and we met with you a couple months ago here, and moving forward, a draft report is being written up by our Compass Resource Management, our facilitator that's working closely. So we have a number of community partners that are working with us as we explore feasible fish passage. And they've reviewed as a committee several different options for both upstream and downstream fish passage. And just wanted to reassure you that that program is the avenue that we will continue to explore that with the City of Maple Ridge staff.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I sincerely hope to see that fish passage in place during my lifetime. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Councillor Tan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the fish passage soon. And thank you so much to BC Hydro for coming. It's really wonderful to have people be able to, delegations be able to come here and really to hear from you directly. I do have questions, I think mainly around the capacity and reliability of the grid. I think one of the largest questions maybe for me, and my sense is around the table as well, is Hydro able to guarantee us that, Maple Ridge residents, when during the heat domes and during the deep freezes that we know are happening right now and are going to just keep increasing in severity and frequency in the future, with all that, do we have any concern? Will Maple Ridge residents be able to have power during those extreme weather events?
Yeah, I can talk about the reliability requirements of the electric system. So we take reliability on our system very seriously because that is something that's very fundamental. It's part of our mission statement to provide reliable and safe power to our customers. And we compare our reliability performance against other Electricity Canada customers across Canada and other utilities. And we actually have a better reliability than the Electricity Canada average, both from a frequency standpoint of outages as well as duration. And from that perspective, if you start looking at our numbers, they actually compare quite favorably against the other utilities. In terms of our approach, we spend a lot of money, as I said in my presentation. About $21 billion of the $36 billion plan goes towards sustainment. And a large portion of that actually is to ensure the resiliency and the reliability of our existing infrastructure. I'll give you an example. If you look at our overall spend on vegetation management, it used to be about $50 million 5 years ago. Currently, we are spending about $100 million on vegetation management because trees are one of the biggest contributors to unreliability. And if you look at the future, we expect the vegetation program to actually expand the next 5 years also, because we have to address not only the reliability requirements from vegetation management, but also the wildfire implications. So I think there's a number of programs that we have in place that increase the resiliency of our system because we take reliability quite seriously. And as electrification starts to happen, we are cognizant of the fact that our customers are actually going to be relying on electricity more and more. So from that perspective, we have a huge program and a dedicated team that looks at all the reliability of our 1,500 feeders we have in the province. And every year we analyze those 1,500 feeders and we look at the worst performing feeders and come up with ways of managing the reliability and improving it. So I think from that perspective, reliability is a key force for us as we go forward with our electrification plans.
Thank you for that. Okay, I think what I understand is that there are thresholds that you mean and compare yourselves to the Canadian average, and that there's a lot of reliability testing and investment that you do. And through Madam Chair again, my next question is around capacity. So, this is one story I hear. Help me understand the truth or lack of accuracy of the story. We are moving to electrification in the province in a big way with Clean BC, with EVs, and now with many municipalities looking at the zero carbon step code. And then, yes, there is Site C coming on, but Site C is going to be not really enough to provide for all this electrification demands. And on top of that, there's this call for power going out. And doesn't that show that BC Hydro just doesn't have enough power? This is the story that I hear is how would BC respond to that? BC Hydro respond to that?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the electrification change that has happened in the province, it's only in the last 3 years or so that we are starting to look at that impact from an electrification standpoint. And we have actually planned this call a year and a half ago because we anticipated that the requirements for energy are going to increase. So I think Site C, the call that we are currently underway, and there's flexibility built into the call because we do expect that there's a lot of interest from the IPP communities for this call. As I mentioned before, for 15 years, we haven't had a call. So there's a desire built into that community for actually to come up with those projects and connect to BC Hydro. And as we are in the midst of this call, we have already started planning for the next call. And that is going to be announced sometimes next year. And the year after that will be another call. So I think there's a series of calls that we anticipate depending on how the electrification takes traction in BC. And if you remember the slide that I showed you in terms of the future load growth, there's a wide variance that we see in terms of where the electrification will take us. And we are looking for those inputs and those signposts constantly and coming up with an approach from a planning standpoint, not only to have infrastructure, which is the substations and the transmission wires and the distribution, but also the generation. So I think that is all part of what we are planning for. And the other thing I would mention is we just finished our integrated resource plan, which gives us a 20-year view of both the load and the energy. And that was approved by the commission earlier this year. We are in the midst of actually coming up with a new integrated resource plan, which is going to be filed in February to the BCUC. And that will outline our approach towards the energy resources that we are looking for, as well as the infrastructure that is required for us to meet those future requirements from an electrification standpoint.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just to follow up on that, so I make sure I understand, is there, I hear about these calls for power, and my understanding is perhaps in the industry, these are fairly standard. And just to make sure I understand, is there a possibility, is there a future that you might see where we need power, where move towards electrification in a, large scenario sort of way, and that these calls for power are what, don't yield the kind of power we want. And so residents are sort of left without the power that they need.
No, our planning doesn't show that there's not going to be enough power and capacity for the future needs. As I said, the proposals that we are evaluating look very promising for us. There's a lot of wind, there's a lot of solar combined with batteries that the proponents are putting forward. So I think there's a fair bit of potential when it comes to wind and solar in BC. We also have some ability for us to increase the generation on our existing facilities. For example, if you know, Revelstoke is one of our generation facilities. It's got 5 units there of 500 megawatts each. We have an ability to put another 6th unit there, which is currently not there. And that'll give us about 500 megawatts of capacity if we proceed with that. So I think given the Site C generation, given the fact that we can actually expand Revelstoke generation unit 6, as well as the IPP community's desire to actually help us with the energy in the province, I think we are comfortably positioned in terms of what the future needs in the province are going to be from an electricity use.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Madam Chair. And I have one last one that I'll save for round 2.
Mayor Remy?
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for being here, as well as Fortis. It was important to have both organizations here, and I'm going to go along the same lines of questioning with that we did with Fortis. Look, as a council, we have to make decisions based on available data, right? So more and more cities are moving towards zero carbon step code. What is frustrating me right now is there is so much information or misinformation or disinformation that is floating around the airwaves today. And I'm not seeing hydro really coming out and addressing those issues. One quote that I heard off one of the radio stations did in 2035, when all cars that are sold are mandated to be EV, they're saying that 67% of the capacity of Site C will all go towards those cars. Is that a true statement? Because I'm curious, because that's a lot of power that's coming out of there. Where are you going to have power for everybody else that's doing the step codes? Because that's coming in 2030, right? So I'd like to see hydro coming out and actually defending and responding to these types of comments that are out there, but I'm not seeing that. And I know in my conversations with mayors, there is a serious question about where we will be able to get our power, especially if we all start adopting step codes and so on and so forth. So we need to be able to have some kind of the ability to just be confident in what BC Hydro is doing, but I'm not seeing BC Hydro coming out and actually speaking to these issues. And I know, Emily, we spoke at LMLGA about some of the challenges that I was hearing, which was surprising to me, especially when we're talking about trying to, at some point, light up our industrial area, 600 acres of industrial, and all the other industrial areas that we're working on. So I'm kind of concerned because I'm not hearing you coming out and definitely saying, yes, we're going to be okay, and here's why we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And publicly saying those things.
Yeah. So maybe I'll address that in 2 parts, Amir. And the first is we have addressed that as part of our integrated resource plan that I talked about, which we submitted to the commission a couple of years ago, and we got approval for that this year. So as part of that, we do have electrification scenarios that run the whole gamut of low load scenario versus the high accelerated, which aligns with the provincial goals that I talked about. I think going forward, we are obviously going to be updating our IRP, which is the integrated resource plan, on an 18-month basis, because the energy landscape is changing. So that will be submitted in February. So I think that will address a lot of the things that you had talked about in terms of the generation, because the integrated resource plan is all about where the generation will come from in terms of the load. I think if you look at our overall approach towards the generation is, we obviously have the Site C, which you mentioned that there's a lot of earmarked consumption that already people are talking about. The other thing is that we are very positive about this call that's happening. And the reason for that is the initial response from the proponents is actually going to be higher than what we actually are looking for, which is 3,000 gigawatt hours. So we haven't gone through the evaluation, so I'm just giving an indication, which allows us to actually use that information to start structuring the future calls. So in our mind, we are looking at a series of calls in the future, as opposed to a one-off call, which we have done historically before. When the last one happened in 2008, that was a one-off call. I think for us to look at it in the future, we look at a number of these things, and the IPP community playing a key role in terms of providing us with that energy we are looking for. The second thing I would, or the third thing I would say is there's uncertainty in terms of what that electrification means. For example, Fortis talked about the symbiotic relationship between BC Hydro and Fortis. We don't know what that symbiotic relation looks like in the future. What kind of transition would happen from gas over to electricity? And I think to address that, we are actually undertaking a modeling exercise right now with the government. And we have hired a consultant that's going to be looking at how that modeling would actually transpire in the future, because other jurisdictions have gone through that also. So I think that knowledge of, in terms of the energy landscape in the future through this modeling exercise that we are doing will allow us to actually get a better understanding of that generation required in the future and for us to plan for it. So I think the future is uncertain, but we have the tools in place right now for BC Hydro to allow us to actually move forward with as that future becomes more certain in the coming years.
Follow-up question, Madam
Yes, go ahead.
Chair? I don't know if that actually comforts me. You know, we know where the province wants to go with electric vehicles. The federal wants to do that as well. We know 2030 they want everybody to adopt a step code. You know, do we need to build another Site C? Because that takes a decade to go. Are we going to get to that point where here we are in 2035 and realize, oops, we need to build something more, and now what everybody's talking about, rolling blackouts and lack of energy and electricity, you know, if we're going to start to adopt what we believe is the right things to do for climate change, we need to understand, and we need to be we need to be comfortable that the information coming to us is accurate. So while you talk about modeling exercises, I don't know what all of that means. You know, at the end of the day, are you going to, in 10 years from now, 10 years, 12 years from now, are you going to have the right amount of power to support the entire Lower Mainland? If everybody is on heat pumps and everybody's driving electric cars, are you going to have that power or not? That's the question. And then the second part to that is, I think you guys need to go on a PR campaign to start explaining this to people, because someone else has got your narrative. Someone else is stealing that from you. So how are we as a community, how are we as a council supposed to make our decisions based on a whole bunch of other narratives that are on there? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So to answer your question, if you look at our energy and our load, we are long energy right now, which means we have more generation than load. So I think that allows us to be flexible for the coming needs on the system. And as I said, the transition is not going to happen overnight. If you look at the overall requirement from an IPP standpoint, we are aggressively moving towards the first IPP to be online from this Clean Power Call by 2028, which is only about 4 years away. So I think aggressively we are moving forward with timelines which are unprecedented. And we are looking at accelerating the permitting requirements for those IPPs for us to ensure that we can get them on our system as soon as possible. And we are working very closely with the government. And as I said, that gives us that flexibility, and the interest from the IPP communities gives us that confidence that we will have enough power for the electrification that's going to happen in the province. And as far as the new dams are concerned, Hydro is not going to be looking at another Site C after this, because this is the last big dam that we are building. The future of the energy in the future is going to come from the IPP communities. And I think we are aggressively working towards it. We've had a lot of discussions with the First Nations, because if you look at our call that's coming up, we are looking at the first time joint ownership with First Nations. And that is going to accelerate the requirements of getting those approvals in place as soon as possible because of the ownership structure that we are moving forward with. So I think we are very confident that we are on the right path when it comes to the future energy needs. And we are positively looking forward to this call and the accelerated timelines of getting those projects on our system as soon as we can, and then planning for the next. And that gives us the confidence that we can meet the future needs of the province as it unfolds.
Thank you for that. I think I'll be looking to see a lot of that information around in the public circle, explaining that to people in a way that whatever experts want to come out and say you're wrong or you're right, you need to be able to defend that, because we can't make decisions if we can't rely on what you're actually saying. So I will look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Rumi. Councillor Dose, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Very good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you very much, BC Hydro and Fortis, for coming out here. I'm very grateful that you did, because I've been battling with this zero carbon step code issue since we discussed it, and I've been receiving calls from a lot of people, expressing the various concerns, some of which have been addressed by my colleagues here. But one particular one that has not been touched and has always been, I would say, avoided by a lot of people is affordability. It is easy to say that if we don't have enough electricity supply from here generated internally in BC, that we can import from either Alberta or the United States, as the case might be. Yes, at what cost? Because if you tell me that there's availability and reliability of power supply, but there is not affordability, as far as the average person is concerned, it is not available to them. It's not reachable. So my question to you, or my comment is, do you have any information that we can use to compare affordability of power consumption and supply to the average home in BC compared to what we have in neighboring states like Alberta, or even the United States, say Washington State over there, that can give us a basis? Because the fear among a lot of people that spoke with me is that, yes, you can say that BC Hydro can provide us availability of power supply and reliability, but can we afford it? That is number one. And just like a follow-up or support to what Mayor Rumi has said, we need to actually come up with better explanation as to how we are going to produce this electricity, because I can tell you that we all know, everybody knows that generation of electricity is not what you can do overnight. And you have just said it here now, that this Site C is the last major dam that you guys are looking at building in BC. So that means that we don't look forward to seeing any additional dam construction in the next 2 or 3 or so years now, not to talk about getting it ready for 2030. So my question is, how affordable is what you're going to provide us is? And I think that is what's going to drive everything, because a lot of people are already complaining about the affordability of BC, and I have lost a lot of friends to Alberta and Ontario over this issue. So my question still continues to be affordability. What can you say about that, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. And I think affordability is a key area that we benchmark and compare ourselves against other utilities. And we've been taking part in this Hydro-Quebec benchmarking study on a yearly basis, which looks at the utility rates across North America for a number of years. And consistently, BC Hydro's rates are either the second or the third lowest in North America when it comes to residential commercial customers. So I think that should give you some comfort in terms of how our rates are compared to others. And we always strive to be in that area from a ranking standpoint as we go forward. So, and if you would like, we can share that information through Emily and provide you with that ability to share that with your constituents so that they are aware of where BC Hydro's rates are. The other thing I would mention is that if you look at our rates for this year, they are increasing by 2.3%. And with the credit that the government announced this year, the customers should actually see probably not an increase in the rates. It's probably going to be flat given the credit. So I think from our standpoint, the rates are an important element of what we look at. And if you look at the mandate that the government has given us, our rates cannot increase more than the cumulative impact from a CPI perspective. So I think that is something that we always keep in mind as we move forward with our analysis of the rate impact. And we always want to make sure that we are able to meet the mandate that the government has put forward. As far as the rates are concerned, we are currently in the last test period of our revenue requirement application with the Commission. And for next year and the year after, we are putting a new revenue requirement application in front of the Commission that will outline the rates for the next 2 years. So from that standpoint, we are always looking at rate affordability and managing it against other utilities and being in that top quadrant when it comes to the lowest rates in North America.
If I may just add, thank you, Ajay. So yeah, Ajay was saying, for the past 3 decades, we've been encouraging our customers to be power smart through our programs, rewards and rebates. And we're now looking to expand this by introducing more customer choice. We know that this is important to our customers. And just something that we're very excited to announce is that this week here, we introduced the new voluntary rate structure. So as time varying rates, our customers have choice to go into their MyBC Hydro accounts, and they have the option to select time of use rates. So if you have electric vehicle, this is a great option for you to charge overnight during off-peak hours, and you can receive slight decrease in your rates that way, as well as doing your laundry, all of the higher usage equipment in your home. If you opt to be part of this new program, you can do those between 11 p.m. and I believe 6 a.m. and you can receive a little bit of a decrease in your charges there. So just wanted to highlight that too.
Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I just wanted to just make sure I clarify and understand that piece about capacity. So I think what you said in response to the mayor is that we are the next in order to achieve power, we're going to put all these calls to power, and the reliance here is on independent power producers, and that you have an integrated resource plan that has been submitted to the BC Utilities Commission that validates that the plan that you're putting into place is enough. Is that sort of, am I understanding the gist of that?
Yeah, I think the integrated resource plan that I talked about gives us a 20-year view of the load that is required on the system and the generation where it's going to come from. So it sets out the expectations in terms of how those things are going to be combined together to give us the complete picture of how BC Hydro meets those requirements. As part of that, we have to make projections on the load forecast. And as we make those projections, we also have to look at where the generation will come from. And if you look at the current call that we are underway with, the genesis of that was laid in the last IRP, where we talked about the fact that we need to have more energy on the system for us to allow to meet those loads. And I think the other aspect that I would talk about is, in addition to the load growth, we also has, as Emily pointed out, demand side management program, which allows us to actually look at energy efficiency and the consumption of the capacity that reduces the per capita energy consumption of our customers. So I think it's a combination of looking at how we serve that load through new generation and also trying to reduce the power consumption through the DSM program that we have in our organization.
Thank you for that. I think conceptually and theoretically, I can see what you're saying manifesting. I'm just curious, and I think, there's a lot of he said, she said, and there's a lot of people out there who are saying that BC Hydro can't do it. So is there a third-party report that you could share with us and that our staff can take a look? And is there a third-party validation report that you could provide to us around these around the integrated resource plan?
Yeah, I don't think we have I can't think of a third-party report for our resource planning. I would say that the next IRP, the integrated resource plan that we are going to file in in February, will outline our expectations in terms of the load and the generation. And it's an open process where we have different interveners asking us questions in terms of where that load and the resource balance is going to come from. We have the BCUC asking us those questions. So I think it's that open discussion with the commission and going through the regulatory process that allows us the confidence that we are on the right path. So I think that document in my mind is going to set out the next stage for the load resource balance and to answer some of the questions that you're asking for from where the new resources will come from as the energy increases.
Thank you. Okay, we will look out for that that BC Utilities Commission validated plan. My last question to you, Madam Chair, is on a different note, I just wanted to ask about the reliability of fully electric equipment like heat pumps and also water heating, electric water heaters. There's a lot out there about that not being as reliable. Can you speak to us about that? About whether are all electric pieces of equipment reliable?
Yeah, I don't have the stats for the reliability of the heat pumps and maybe we can get back to you on that after this. My understanding is that those pieces of equipment are quite reliable. We have tested some of those in the cold conditions because there's been discussion about the heat pumps not working in very cold conditions in BC, and we haven't come across those concerns. So, but we can get you some more information in terms of the stats on how the reliability of those new equipment compares against the traditional ones.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you everyone for hanging with us through that. We're going to talk about a lot of items in the next few months that have to do with our changing climate and the energy transition that we're in. So this is really valuable information for us to have. So thank you to Hydro. Thank you to Fortis for being here today and answering our detailed questions. I think we all learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to call a 5-minute break and then we're going to come back and just power through the rest of our agenda.
What happens in 5 minutes?
Bring it down.
Oh. You didn't bring any for us?
Started here in 1 minute.
No. No, that's not the DPs. Sorry, I was wrong.
Not as much as usual.
There is one DP.
Not yet.
Forgot about the other ones.
Give it time.
Amanda's giving.
Good to go?
You
Okay,
can
guys.
Speed talk, right?
We're going to come on back. What do we have next?
Thank you, Worship. The next item is item 5.1, housing legislation amendments for small-scale multi-unit housing and transit-oriented area regulatory requirements, and staff are in attendance to present.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. So the first two items on the agenda this afternoon are going to be a continuation of our conversation as it relates to small-scale multi-unit housing and the transit-oriented area requirements. So the first item will be speaking to the bylaw requirements that will enable both of these pieces of legislation, and then we'll switch to focusing just on the transit-oriented area. As you're very aware, the province brought in some legislation at the end of last year, which has set off a work program, which is ultimately culminating in our conversation this afternoon. So essentially, these bylaws are enabling up to 4 or 6 small-scale units on single detached or duplex lots, as well as reducing or eliminating parking requirements in certain areas of the municipality. And it is phrased as such to capture both the small-scale Bill 44 requirement and the TOA Bill 47 requirement. In addition to the pieces of legislation, the province brought forward some provincial policy manuals that we will just have to briefly touch on between both of these items. Before we jump into what the bylaws look like, just as a very brief reminder, from a small-scale multi-unit housing perspective, this is really focusing on our ground-oriented housing forms. So our principal single families with secondary suites, detached garden suites, our duplex, triplexes, and fourplexes, and some forms of mini townhomes. From the transit-oriented areas perspective, this is going to be looking at more of our apartment and perhaps some townhouse forms, but this is definitely our residential or mixed-use housing form. So the next few slides are really going to step through the elements of the zoning and the parking bylaw that are before you, and they're broken out for clarity, but not necessarily creativity. So from the zoning bylaw perspective, for the elements that relate to the small scale multi-unit housing, we are bringing forward a new definition. So this is a definition that the province brought forward. And I should also mention that this material is very much in alignment with what was presented in May. It's just been redrafted into the zoning bylaw format. We also have a new section. It will be 402.29 in the zoning bylaw, retitled as urban infill residential, to essentially capture all of the requirements that up until today would have been called small scale multi-unit housing. So this is where we get the number of dwelling units by lot size and the types of housing form. We will also be amending all of our existing single family and duplex zones to allow the now called urban infill residential housing form, either as in a principal or an accessory use. We will also be introducing a new zone. So this is the one that's going to have a new minimum lot area for any further subdivision within the city. This is still set at 450 square meters, and very much in reflective of our conversation in May. We will come back to you in the coming months if any amendments need to be made to this new minimum lot area. And then the other elements will of course include all of the required setbacks, lot coverage, height, our typical zone requirements. Zone amending bylaw 7998 2024 also speaks to the requirements for the transit-oriented areas. So under this heading, we also have another new definition, very much speaking to where the TOAs will be within our community, and the bylaw amendment does include a map in the schedules. And there will also be a new section 402.30 that will speak to the requirements in terms of the density requirements for these areas. Looking briefly at the off-street parking and loading bylaw amendment, so very similar to the zoning, this is the requirements being brought forward to enable both small-scale multi-unit housing and the TOAs. namely that we'll be bringing in some new definitions. They are very similar to the definitions that are in the zoning bylaw, as well as our parking requirements. So this is going to be removing the 2 space requirements for all of the housing forms listed on the screen and replacing with a little bit more nuance as it relates to single detached, our houseplex forms, and then our street townhomes. You will note that this is an amendment into the existing parking bylaw. So this is largely due to facilitate the timeline requirement that the province has requested. These changes will be brought forward into the new parking bylaw, and further refinements will also be made. So just bear in mind that this is kind of the quick and dirty amendment into the off-street parking and loading bylaw. And then it will also include a new schedule that kind of speaks to the lack of parking requirements for the 400 meters within the prescribed bus stops as enabled under Bill 44, and then the lack of the inability to require residential parking spaces within the TOAs, leaving the ability to require parking spaces for non-residential uses. We have also incorporated a requirement for 1 van accessible space and 1 standard accessible space for the residential parking spaces within the TOA, which is enabled under the legislation and the policy manual, and it is in alignment with where the new parking bylaw will be headed. So in terms of next steps, these 2 bylaws will be moved forward to the next regular council meeting for consideration of first, second, and third reading. Neither of these bylaws are able to have a public hearing. In terms of the zone amending bylaw, it is prohibited by the legislation. And in terms of the off-street parking bylaw, it is in a land use bylaw. So there is typically no public hearing for these types of bylaws. Once it is received final adoption at the end of the month, we will notify the province as requested. And then starting in July, we'll be able to take in applications for either the small scale multi-unit housing as well as the transit-oriented area development applications. As just briefly, as I touched on earlier, at which point we will begin monitoring the impacts. You will likely see an amending bylaw at some point in the future where we adjust some of the setbacks, or who knows what requirements might need a little bit of tweaking, but this is going to be our first cut at the can for this. The last item that I just want to break down for you is that this report does include 5 recommendations. So the first 2 speak to the requirement that council has to consider the policy manual as it relates to these pieces of legislations. So that's what kind of the wording under 1 and 2 speaks to. Recommendations 3 and 4 are essentially the bylaw readings. And then for the 5th recommendation, it's essentially an extension for any development application that we have in stream touching any of the listed zones, just in case there's any processing delays or timelines. It just gives us a little bit more flexibility to move them through under the current system. They get an extra year essentially from wherever point they are currently at in the process. And that's all I have on this item.
Thank you very much. I will open it up for questions. I'm going to move the recommendation. May I have a recommendation, please? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Duick. Questions? Councillor Youssef, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation and report. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff, how much, if any, say will council have over development going forward in these areas once these, or if these 2 bylaws are adopted vis-a-vis the provincial legislation?
Through the chair, so the small scale multi-unit housing is essentially going straight to building permit now. So very similar to how someone would make a single family home application, these types of applications would go forward. The caveat there is we are still requiring a development permit for the 4plexes. So that would come, has the potential to come before council, as well as if there's any variances requested. So there's still some opportunities to come before council, but very much I would consider this process similar to what is now our single family home process. Looking at the transit-oriented area piece, these will continue to come before council. So while we are unable to turn away an application unless it meets the stated density, there is no exemption from the typical process. So it will likely include a rezoning, it will include a development permit, it will include the process that you are familiar with today. And then anything above that density will be subject to any further council policy or provisions that will be subject to further council conversation.
Thank you for that. Follow up, Madam Chair, through you. So let's say an application, a permit application comes in, because it's no longer going to be an application that's coming to us. With this legislation in place, if the development does not fit within the neighborhood, or if there's opposition throughout the neighborhood to a particular development, is there any recourse for council or for the municipality to be able to halt it, stop it, push it back?
Through the chair, it is one of the challenges brought forward through this legislation, where since it is intending to streamline and bring more homes online faster, those levers, if you will, aren't as available. So it is very much a traditional building permit process at this point.
Right. And lastly, Madam Chair, through you to staff, if these two bylaws that are before us are not passed, will the city have any control, or is it kind of a rubber stamp at this point to the provincial legislation?
Through the chair, the province hasn't necessarily been explicit on what may occur should a municipality not bring forward zone amending bylaws in alignment with Bill 44 and Bill 47, but it is assumed that they would take issue with that and conversations would occur. So where the flexibility lies with the amending bylaws before you is that they have been drafted largely taking into account the Maple Ridge context where possible. So there are elements that certainly have been removed from our ability, but for the other ones, particularly when we've been feeding through the policy manual considerations, we have been trying to take into account what we're experiencing within our community today to try and make these as gentle infill as possible.
Thank you very much for that diligent work that staff have done to bring these bylaws forward in this form. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Councillor Carreras, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for this. I know it's been just a massive amount of work in a very, very short time for all cities, in particular our staff, to wade through all of this and move through it. So I appreciate the work you're doing. A couple of questions on the TOA. I don't have so much of an issue with, and again, I'm going to leave my comments for when we do this next Tuesday, but I'm going to specifically ask questions, and it's around the TOA. When you talk about the bus stop and it has to be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., it has to stop. Can you please tell me, has there been any conversation with the province around the West Coast Express and why those are considered, and they're in legislation, those two stops, because they only run Monday to Friday. They only run for 3 hours in the morning. They run for 3 hours in the afternoon. I would say that's worse transit service than almost anywhere else in our city.
Through the chair, we haven't had that specific conversation just based on the timeline and the requirements. It's certainly something that we're aware of. Based on the tiers that were set out through the policy manual and the legislation, they've captured it under a tier. So from that perspective, it was somewhat treated as a fait accompli. Beyond that, I think the next item really speaks to that land use planning process around the TOAs. And I think that's where we can have a bit of a conversation about what that can look like, where we do have a bit more flexibility in terms of the uses that can reflect the reality of the fact that it currently is a one-way system.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm only going to ask my questions. We can talk about this all we want next week. Two other quick questions on this. So my understanding is any of the community that's joined us today, there was a very extensive conversation on this. Was it last Tuesday? 2 Tuesdays?
May 14th.
May 14th is when we had a very, very long conversation about this. So we made some decisions in some of the very limited flexibility that we had, and some of it aren't, especially in the height, they differ a bit from the province's recommendations. Could the province still overrule the decisions that we're making on some of the setbacks and height and the limited flexibility that we had?
Through the chair, it's a bit uncertain. Again, most municipalities haven't quite hit that date yet, so we really don't know what that conversation could look like. From what we've heard, there's been general encouragement that municipalities take serious consideration of the policy manual into effect, which is largely the intent of the May conversation, where we can kind of illustrate what the province is looking for, where we're at, and either where we're aligning with the province and or if we aren't aligning with the province, the justification for it. And that's that Maple Ridge context. So where possible and where appropriate, we have tried to factor in that component. Once we notify the province following final adoption, that's when that conversation would take place.
Okay, and I just have one other quick question, because we did talk a lot about the height in our workshop, and part of the discussion was making sure that the height that we've got in there made sure that we could have 3 levels above ground. So if there were basement suites or a bottom level, that it was above ground. And I'm just asking because in an upcoming application on today, it's showing the height over what we've limited. So I think we said 9.5. And I think there's something coming to us that is 10. I'm just trying to find it. There's so many pages here. And I just want to make sure that the 9.5 is going to allow for the 3 stories above ground.
Through the chair. So the specifics to the other application, I'll leave to Development Services.
Yeah.
The height that we've picked at this point in time aligns with the context that we have in place within the zoning bylaw. So it doesn't, as you're seeing, variants are permitted. But in this case, it is a realistic frame that will be an appropriate streetscape for our context and enable 3 stories.
Okay, because that was a concern for us. But thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'm good. Thank you.
Councillor Duke.
Thank you. Councillor Carreras asked a little bit about the TOAs. So in the report, it talks about the second recommendation, looking at the land use for those areas, but yet it says if we adopt this, it's going to go ahead and applications can be received. So will the applications be received as per what is anticipated under Bill 44 or?
So the second item speaks to the land use planning process a little bit better. Can we maybe have that discussion after I run through that presentation?
Sure. Yeah, because it's got some couple different scenarios here. So I need some clarification. For example, Port Haney.
This bylaw speaks to the density. So the
Yeah.
land uses is the other one. So essentially if it's below that density or the height, we can't turn it away. What council chooses to do with it at that point in time is likely going to depend on the land use planning conversation that we will have in just a moment.
But then we talked about in one of your slides, the density being potential apartment buildings.
It's likely that the housing form, it's hard because the minimum height is 8 stories and 12 stories. Apartment is realistically the housing form that fits there.
Okay. I'll wait for the next presentation then. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Duke. I did note down that question as well, just carried forward into the next item. Any other questions from council? I just want to ask a little bit about the parking. I understand that it's sort of a stopgap, or like so temporarily addressing the requirement to update this, and we're going to have a more fulsome conversation. The requirement for a van accessible spot and another accessible spot, how is that calculated?
Through the chair, under the draft parking bylaw, it's set out by ratio. So up to, I believe, 25 or 26 regular residential parking spaces triggers the requirement for 1 van accessible spot and 1 accessible spot. And then it goes up from there. So I don't entirely know all the ratios off the top of my head, but if let's just say it was a parking requirement for 300 spaces, it's probably 5 van accessible spaces or 5 regular and 2 vans. So that ratio is set in the in-stream parking bylaw, and we just copied out the relevant portions for this parking amendment.
Thank you. That does address my concern about how that works. And so then does staff anticipate when we do come back to a parking conversation that there will sort of be more options provided for council to consider in terms of the minimums that we're requiring, not sort of where we do have some discretion and we need to make some decisions as a community about what we're asking for. I'm just wondering if that is sort of the way that staff sees it going.
Through the chair, the revised parking bylaw it takes a slightly different approach on how the uses are identified. So that's where for anything non-residential, council has the ability to weigh in on what those requirements would be. And those are the only ones that would apply within a transit-oriented area. So at this point in time, we are able to still require anything that isn't residential and those accessible spaces. We are still waiting on an interpretation if we can require visitor parking. So that level of detail and that nuance will come back in the next round of the parking bylaw.
Thank you very much. Okay, seeing no more questions, I will call the vote. All those in favor of moving this forward to the next council meeting, and Councillor Youssef, sorry, I'm not sure if I just missed your hand. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, and back to you.
All right, for the second item, this one's going to focus solely on the transit-oriented area designation bylaw. And I think we'll be able to kind of peel into some of what this means from a land use perspective. So very similar, November, that's why we're here today. But one of the elements that we have to delve into under this report is the policy manual consideration. So that conversation that we had in May on the small scale multi-unit housing, there's a truncated version for the transit-oriented area. So there's about 6 elements that the province has asked us to consider. So the first set is on the screen before you, namely that we confirm where these spaces are based on the material provided by the province. We've confirmed the type, we've confirmed the density, and we have mapped them. So the check marks are showing that this is the work that we've completed. So in Maple Ridge, we have at the moment we are a tier 4 and a tier 5. So the smaller node within these TOAs is where we are going to be, where the requirement is going to be up to 12 stories of allowable height and then up to 4 FSR for allowable density. And then the outer tier, so the 201 meters to 400 is going to be up to 8 stories in allowable height and up to 3 FSR in terms of allowable density. The last 2 elements that the province was asking us to consider is the preparation of the TOA plan and then the implementing the density requirements. So the density requirements is really that zoning bylaw amendment that we were just talking about. And then the TOA plans is one of the recommendations in this council report and presentation. Due to the tight timelines, essentially the province is asking councils to look at the land uses within the TOAs. Given the tight timeline, it wasn't necessarily feasible to have that completed fully by June 30th. So there's essentially 2 options before council. We can set off on a special SETI, which is what the recommendation is in this report to target those 3 TOAs, or we can hold off until a larger OCP review occurs, which is of course mandated by the end of December. So we'll come back to the land use review in just a moment. This slide really speaks out to what is in the designation bylaw itself. It is essentially 3 maps that show these 3 TOAs. It is important to note that the TOA designation bylaw does not impact land use or zoning itself. It is essentially drawing a circle on a map illustrating where these areas are. These are what the maps look like. So coming back to the planning process for a moment. So again, because the designation bylaw does not change land use or zoning, and certain parts of our nodes include areas that weren't necessarily originally envisioned for complete communities or higher density, this is that time for us to kind of start looking at what these look like. So one of the ones around the Maple Meadow Station is largely being caught up with the Lougheed Transit Corridor area planning process. So we have made some foray into what that looks like. The Haney Transit Exchange, would be really a gut check, if you will, to see if there's any discrepancies with what land uses we have in place today. And then it's the Port Haney one where the western portion was envisioned to be single family. And I think that's one of the areas where we need a closer look at what those land uses are. So the recommendation in the report would be essentially setting us off on to focus on those three particular areas. At a very high level, we'd be reviewing the policies and we have in place, as well as some of the upcoming studies that would be coming forward, and refine some draft land uses for both council consideration and a mini public process. So in terms of what this bylaws process would look like, it will also go through the same bylaw adoption process as the two that we just spoke about. No public hearing, as again, it isn't actually a land use bylaw. I have the same note about the complementary zone amending and parking amending bylaws that will be brought forward in conjunction with this one. And then once this designation bylaw is adopted, we will also notify the ministry as required. And again, we will begin processing TOA applications as of July 2nd. So what that likely translates to is if it's an application that is under 8 or under 12 stories, we will be able to move it forward under our typical process. If it starts to go above those two thresholds, we will bring it forward to council, but there's going to be a bit of a conversation in terms of what that looks like, because we are still waiting for guidance on density bonusing from the province, which is anticipated later this year. So it's going to be a little bit on a case-by-case basis, depending what comes in, because of course, these densities aren't requirements, they're thresholds. So if someone comes in with a 6-story apartment, we are able to move it forward. And then on the screen, similar to the last presentation, the first one is capturing that we have considered the provincial policy manual as it relates to the designation bylaw, the readings, and then the land use planning process.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Dewick. Seconded by Mayor Remy. Any questions? Councillor Dewick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so the Port Haney is where my question, you referenced that the west side is because right now, single family. But if we adopt this, does that mean somebody could come in potentially with a 6-story apartment building and the neighborhood would have no say in that?
Through the chair, yes, that note is already in effect. So whether you adopt this or not, it's already there. It's the first one that the province brought in on December 7th. So it's more of a housekeeping amendment. It's the other two that are brand new TOAs. But to answer the salient point of the question, yes, if somebody consolidates sufficient lot assembly, they can make an application for a 6-story apartment building with a proposed rezoning, which would then come before council.
So how does our escarpment review play into that?
So it would be, so the application that comes in would be subject to the policies and bylaws in effect at that point in time. If and when an application came in, the report would include the latest information regarding the FRE.
Okay, and then finally, what options does council have? Because as Councillor Carrera said, Port Haney is by no means a transit-oriented area, in my humble opinion, given it's only in the morning, only in the afternoon, it's not on the weekends. So what options do we have to have this conversation with the province?
Conversations with the province are a little bit outside of the designation bylaw scope, but I would say we can respond to the province, assuming this is adopted, we'll be able to notify the province. And I believe there's still routes for advocacy on both the council level as well as the staff level for further refinements and amendments to the pieces of legislation. I would also note that there is the Bill 16 piece, which, while doesn't specifically address the concerns that was raised today, does speak to the fact that the province is willing to bring forward further amendments, somewhat in response to some of the comments or concerns heard by local governments. should the land use planning process be enabled, I think, and if we are to learn further information on where we are able to have conversations or further refinement, we would bring that back towards council as well.
Okay, I'll have to digest that. Thanks.
Yep.
Councillor Ferris.
It's one of those ones that's really hard to just ask questions on. Okay, so quickly, thanks for the FRE. That was a big piece for me about how we go forward and can just automatically happen when there is some risk there. You had talked about something about two recommendations, one about making the decision now or waiting to the OCP review. Can you just talk a little bit about that and why, like, if my understanding is we have to do this, the province is making us do this, we don't have much of a discussion. What does it matter if we do it now or wait for the OCP?
Through the chair, one comment before I answer that, I would also like to just clarify that under the TOAs, we have to accept the application. They are still subject to all of our requirements. So in this case, they still need to provide sufficient geotech, stormwater management, all of the fund servicing studies in order to be able to move it forward. It isn't necessarily that it's approved without any check. But specifically on the process, so it is technically an optional requirement under the policy manual that we conduct the land use review. So the options are essentially to kind of get ahead of the OCP requirement because we know more of what the frameworks are. We know our density, we know our minimum height, we know the density bonusing provisions are coming, and we have a rough idea based on some other work that's been ongoing in terms of servicing and other requirements. So they're not necessarily, like, they're going to be relatively small scale studies for the 3 nodes. And then if we are able to do that, it gives us a little bit more time and capacity to focus on the OCP one in the longer term.
Okay, so the recommendation is that we deal with this today.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. One other question on this, and if you go to the Maple Meadows piece, transit node. Okay, so one question is, my understanding is if a part of the property lands within the circle, the whole property is actually encaptured. So it's actually larger than the circle on the edge. There'll be more. Yes. Okay. So just so everybody knows, it's actually larger than that. Okay. So my other, especially around the Maple Meadow stuff, a big part of that circle is very, very residential with limited access in and out of the area. Are we starting to do the work to design how people can get in and out of those areas?
So the initial elements of that are tied into the Low-Heat Transit corridor conversation and the BRT conversation. So I'd say we've started the conversation, still very much underway with this recommendation. It gives us that little bit more of a focus to have those conversations. And to a comment you made in a previous council meeting, it is also likely a conversation with Pitt Meadows because an element of the node is outside of our jurisdiction. And if helpful, they have also decided they have not completed their land use review of the TOAs by June 30th, and they will be doing it as part of their larger OCP review.
Okay, so they're doing it delayed, they're doing it off of us, so we'll have more. Okay, yeah. Perfect, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a technical question about the first recommendation. I'm seeing here that pursuant to this section of the Local Government Act, the provincial policy manual has been considered and no further consideration of the provincial policy manual is required at this time. I'm curious why that's part of the recommendation.
Through the chair, it's one of the elements that came out of some of the webinars, if you will, from the province, a little bit more prominent as it relates to small scale multi-unit housing, but they were quite clear that we would need some form of evidence of a conversation with council that we had considered the policy manual in an open meeting.
Thank you. I guess my question is something along the lines of, I wonder if there's like sort of more, if there's particularly more reference to be done to the provincial policy manual, whether it's that sort of recommendation would prevent us from then going back to looking at the policy manual.
Oh, through the chair, no, this doesn't prohibit any further changes. It's essentially an acknowledgement of the work that's done to the date, to date. If the land use planning processes or if the province makes further changes to the TOA regulations, we are still more than able to make those amendments.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor of moving this to the next council meeting? And that has passed unanimously. Thank you. So recognizing that we do have other items on the calendar for today, I'd love to try and get through these just DVP applications for those of us, for those waiting specifically on those items. So let's give that our best shot if we could.
The next item on the agenda is a development variance permit, application 2021-571-BP for property located at 12390 Street to allow for a future 2-lot subdivision, and staff are in attendance.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair and Committee, this application is in an area designated urban residential. There's a rezoning application associated with it from RS1 single detached residential to R1 single detached low density urban residential. The total site area is 857 square meters right now. And there are other current applications, as I noted, the rezoning and subdivision applications. This is the subject site on the cadastral map showing at the corner of 124th Avenue and 216th Street. This is the subject property on the ortho photo showing the built environment in the area. And as noted, this development variance application is being received in conjunction with the rezoning subdivision applications to 12390 216th Street to rezone the property from RS1 to R1 to allow for a 2-lot subdivision. And the rezoning application is going to council next Tuesday, along with the recommendation for this variance permit. This is the subdivision proposal, and it shows the 2 lots being taken out of the corner lot, and the variances are largely to do with the large amount of road dedication, as you can see, is being taken 3 meters on one side, and actually 5 meters is being taken off of 124th Avenue. So that's accounts for a lot of the road dedication. The lots, though, of course, have to meet by law the required minimum lot size, which is 371 square meters, and the corner lot is 469 square meters, and the lot to the east is 387 square meters. So as noted, the applications are to reduce the required lot depth from 24 meters to 22.5 meters for the proposed lot 1 and to 22.7 meters for the proposed lot 2, and to waive the requirement the lots adjacent to municipal arterial roads have a minimum lot depth of 30 meters, and that's for lot 1 that is adjacent to 216th Street. Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion to move this forward to the next council meeting? Moved by Councillor Carrera, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? And that has passed unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item.
This next application here is for a renewal or extension of an existing development variance permit that has expired for the addresses of 10392 and 10393 248th Street. And it's for development variance permit extension. The area is designated medium density residential, and the proposed OCP designation is low medium multifamily. The existing zoning is RM1. It was rezoned a little over 2 years ago. The site area is 1.1 acres. This is the subject property shown on the cadastral map with the 2 addresses. This is previous application, the rezoning required the dedication of 248th Street that curves through the site and creates a hooked parcel with a townhouse project that was also approved with the DP and DVP 2 years ago. To hook across the street with 22 units on the left side and 9 units on the right or east side. This is the site here, just showing it partly cleared. Should be noted that this application, as the rezoning was completed, the developer has started actually doing the site servicing under the rezoning servicing agreement, but the building permit has not been obtained in the required length of time and has expired. So that's the main reason why this is coming back for an extension. So they're servicing it, and just as background, the building permits are ready to issue, but need this extension to be issued. Council authorized the issuance of DVP 2017-510 DVP and 2017-510 DP associated with the rezoning application on December 14th, 2021. So it's actually 2.5 years now. Permits were issued on January 25th, 2022 and have expired on January 25th, 2024. So this application is being received to extend the date to commence construction from 1 year from January 2024 to January 2025. So they have 1 year to get their permits issued and start construction to allow for the development to continue. There are no changes in the form and character, landscaping, or the variances previously granted for the townhouse application. So just a summary of those previously granted variances are on the screen. I can read through them all. One to note, and it was noted by Councillor Carreras, is that in the previous methodology of measuring height was to the top of the roof at 11 meters, and the variance was granted from 11 to 11.3 meters. So it was a 0.3 meter variance. The building's not changing, but under the new methodology, it is now 9.5 meters to the maximum height to the midpoint of the roof, and we'll have to go up to 10.5 meters as noted on the slide. So that's the key issue. No change in the building, but the measurement technique has changed. So the variance was 0.3 meters under the old technique to the top of the roof, and now from 9.5 to 10.5 meters to the midpoint of the roof. So that's really the change of note. Nothing has changed in the building, but that's a variance where there's basically a restatement of the variance with the new bylaw approach. So also just noting there's a required 0.2 spaces per dwelling unit for the visitor spaces, and that would require 7 spaces, and there's a variance for 6 spaces being proposed, and that there was a variance to the subdivision servicing bylaw to waive the requirement for undergrounding of existing utility services. So the recommendations are before you, Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to move this forward to the next council meeting? Moved by Councillor Carreras, seconded by Councillor Duick. Any questions? All right. I guess I'm just wondering, is the applicant here to provide any information on behind the request? I'm sort of interested in the reason, and also just any information that would speak to their ability to meet an extended deadline.
Madam Chair, the applicant did request to be online yesterday, so he may be online. I could ask, he's not chosen to link in online, but he was given the information to do that and requested to attend.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of moving this forward to the next council meeting? And that has passed unanimously. Thank you. So Madam Clerk, recognizing that we have one item still on, or more than one item, but at least one presentation still on the agenda, and just acknowledging where we are in the day, what would be your best advice here in this moment?
Maybe just ask the Director of Finance if there's any urgency to this item, if we can put it on the next agenda.
Okay, so we need to address this one today, so we will recess for now. And
sorry, before we do that, maybe we should just offer a community forum in case there's anybody online.
Good idea, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't see anyone here in council chambers for community forum, and we don't have anyone online. Okay,
perfect.
Cross that item off. Thank you.
And the notice to go into, or sorry, I guess we'll come back and finish this later.
Okay. Do we need a motion to recess?
Yes.
Okay, if I could get a motion, please. Mayor Rumi, seconded
I
by,
actually have a question.
yes, go ahead.
The interview, I'm assuming that's enclosed, and that's at
Can ask around the room, does anyone have any questions on this one and deal with it? If they do, then recess would be appropriate. But if we don't have questions and we can deal with it at council, we could
Yes.
simply move it. So I don't have any questions. If by show of nods, if people have questions, then.
Okay, I see. Okay, well, I see one hand for questions.
Deal with it.
Okay, well, let's forge ahead then. Staff, did you have a verbal presentation for this one?
Just a very brief introduction. So I'm actually very pleased to be able to present this today because he's basically given us a green light. There's a bit of a process with respect to approval. This report has met that requirement. So it really is just about a matter of process, and we'll be able to spin this around fairly quickly. A little bit longer story behind it. All the mechanics of the calculations have changed, and that's why we need this disclosure. So the bylaw and the rates are as we went to the development community with. It was just the background calculations behind it that have changed. And that's why the assist factors have changed to negate the other impacts. So the rates are as you saw this bylaw back in December, almost 18 months ago.
Thank you, staff. It is exciting to see this come forward. Okay, do we have any questions here at Committee of the Whole? Sorry, okay, I'm gonna ask for a motion to move it to the next council meeting. Moved by Councillor Durick, seconded by Councillor Curris. Councillor Youssef, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real brief through you to staff. I just need clarity on this one particular sentence that says to maintain the proposed rate increases in the DCC bylaw at third reading, municipal assist factors have been changed to offset the additional rate increases due to project cost increases. So I need clarity on municipal assist factors and what does that entail and how does it work?
Thank you. So there are a bunch of categories of assets. So from water, sewer, drainage, parks, roads. And each of those elements behaved a little bit differently with respect to the inflationary pieces of cost. So, so to negate the additional inflation that we've seen and keep the rates as proposed, we've had to increase the assist factor. The assist factor is the portion of general revenue or other funding sources that pay for those assets. And in the next major amendment, which is going to be starting very soon, the intent is to take those back down to the 1%. So this is a temporary measure to satisfy the requirements in the ministry to make this a minor amendment and get to the rates in effect as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. I believe I understand where you're going with this. I'll just have to think about it a little more. Thank you very much to staff. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my question.
Okay, not seeing any further questions. I will call the vote. All those in favor of moving this forward. Sorry, Councillor Tan, did you have a question?
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, to let me sneak in there. I don't understand what a municipal assist factor is.
Sure. Okay. So DCCs can't be used entirely to fund a project. The legislation says they can only be used to help fund. So almost all municipalities have set the assist factor at 1%. So this is the portion of growth costs of the project that are funded through taxation or other means. What we've had to do is increase that assist factor to keep the rates the same if we left it at 1% assist factors, the rates would be higher by between 10 and 12%. When I talked to the ministry to see if this was an option, they were not willing to entertain that under a minor amendment. They wanted to push us to a major because it's been 5 years. We are going to be going into a major very soon because of all the changes, housing and other costs. But this would get these rates in effect sooner. So this is about an 80% increase in residential rates. So that's a bit of the, what the assist factor is, but also why are we changing it?
Okay, so to make sure I understand, what that means is that the city, therefore taxpayers, are going to be paying a higher percentage for projects than anticipated because the cost of projects, the cost of capital projects have gone up. You went to the ministry and asked them, can we therefore increase DCC rates to meet the increased cost of projects? They said, no, not under a minor amendment. So you said, okay, let's keep the DCC's rate as was passed by council at third reading. But what that means is that council has to pay more. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. That's it for me, Madam Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Tan. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of moving this to the next council meeting? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you all. I believe one way or the other, we have gotten to the end of our agenda.
We'll just do the meeting of close or the notice of closed meeting.
Okay. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes, please.
Okay, Councillor Duyck has moved that, followed, seconded by Mayor Rumi. All those in favor? Thank you.